Okay, ladies, identity. When I say that word with women, doesn't it make us all kind of go, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Identity is such a topic. And right now, I feel like it's probably a lot more prevalent. I feel like people are really exploring identity, but none of us here are spring chickens. And so I would also say there wasn't a lot on identity in my early years and in those years of kind of trying to figure out what that looked like and what does that even mean? And what does that look like for my roles and all the different things? But it took me forever to be comfortable in my own skin. So what do you feel like the biggest life lesson about being comfortable in your own skin has been? How have you gotten there? You know, what victories and failures and all of those things have you walked through?
I can tell you the pathway for me was most of the things, I went in the wrong direction and then I realized that wasn't working. So I built my identity in a Christian home around the Christian ministers that I was part of. And what I thought I kind of replaced God with them. This is what it looks like. This is what we're supposed to look like. And I kept trying to be that person. Well, of course, I have a completely different personality, different gift mix, different calling, different destiny. I didn't even know any of those words back then, but it wasn't working for me. And when that all fell apart, I really fell apart. Like I was not functioning. I had to get down to the basics. Well, who am I? Who are you, God? What did you make me for? And it's been a long journey of that, but coming into an understanding that I have been created with unique gifts, that we are together to work with one another, but I can't be Charity. I can't do what you're doing, but I have my own callings. And so that's kind of how and of course, understanding through the scripture what identity truly is in Christ. That was kind of my path towards it.
How do you feel like you discovered who you were? So what I heard you say was at first I tried to follow someone else. Then I had to realize, I really needed to be true to who I was. But how did you even really discover that and figure that out?
Yeah, first thing was a complete reorientation of what I understood the Christian life to be. Because I had somehow adopted, okay, I know Jesus lives in me. He's saved me, but I'm just trying to do it as best I can to please him. I didn't have the concept of the exchanged life. Like he took my old life and put his life in me. And that's the life that is now living through me. So that's how I'm empowered. It's not me trying harder. It's more just relaxing into his love. And so that was the first step in figuring out my identity. But man, lots of years of comparison and perfectionism that were just part of, mental dysfunction in me that I had to, I'd bump up against it again. And I'm thinking, I thought I dealt with this. And here it is again. And it was just another layer of surrendering that. And it just gets down to fear for me anyway, just fear, fear I'll be alone. I think that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And
if they really knew me, if they really saw me, I would be alone.
Yeah.
I think that's a big fear.
It's a false security that we get. I know I'm the youngest of 6, and people wanting to be a people pleaser, wanting to please my family, wanting to be my sister. I idolized my sister. I worshiped her. Basically, she was my God my first 18 years of life. And the false security that if I'm just like them, I'll be okay. If I can please them, I'll be okay. And then it turns into fear. And I learned that there's a proverb once when I got saved, a few years after I got saved and met the Lord, probably 15 years after I was saved, I heard a proverb that said, the fear of man brings a snare, but those that trust the Lord will be safe. And that helped me feel safe. I realized that I was not feeling safe. I was insecure because I wanted to be everyone else, right? Don't we want to,
Yeah.
oh, her hair's amazing. I want to have hair like her or whatever. And that false security. And I felt like my eyes were open to see that I was living in a false security and in fear, like Kathy was saying, fear of man, fear of if I don't do this, this won't happen. Or if I'm not this way, this won't happen. And just trying to let that go. That's still a work in progress, letting it go.
Yeah, I agree. Always a work in progress. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. I feel like a lot of, I think identity has been a thing for me a lot of my life, because I think, you know, when you're a young mom, okay, so you wrap your identity up in the fact that you're a mom. As your kids grow, I remember I had a huge identity crisis when our oldest went off to college. I just was like, what am I going to do as our kids grow? Who am I if I'm not a mom? And if I'm honest, it's still a work in progress to me today. We have adult children now. And who am I without being a mom? And, you know, I don't always think that our husbands even understand even that phrase, because I think they have so many other things going on in their lives on a regular basis. But as a mom, like, that's something that is ingrained in us from the second we find out, you know, that we're going to have a baby. And so then you roll your whole life wrapped around these children. And as they grow and they move away from you, which, okay, you were a successful mom if they grow up and move out. Right? So what do you have left? Like, what are you outside of that role? Or what are you outside of the role of a wife? Or what are you outside of the role of a friend? Like, who am I, like, before the Lord, kind of thing? And so I think for me, I'm just constantly on that journey of who am I without all those roles? Who am I?
Yeah, I think that's really good. We do get caught up in roles. I think too, for me, I'm such a heart healer by nature. Like what I want to do is like dig in there and ask, like, what's keeping me from? So what's keeping me from knowing my identity while balancing the role of motherhood, or what's keeping me from, and it comes back to, I think, your statement about fear, you know? So one of the things that very early on, I realized I had grown up in this kind of tumultuous home, and my identity was wrapped up in the world. Like, one statement that I would say is that my identity was in my body. So was I attractive? Was I not attractive? Did I pass or fail? And if I felt like I failed, like I remember after I had my first baby and things feel different and look different. And I was like, oh my gosh, well, am I even still beautiful? You know, not seeing beauty as being inside, and I'm not trying to over spiritualize that even. I mean, it was literally a crisis of, oh my gosh, he's not going to think I'm beautiful now. Who am I if I don't have this thing or that thing? And I just remember being like, okay, I constantly feel less than. It didn't matter what the situation was. I would like walk into a room and size up the room and be like, oh my gosh, I'm the fattest person in the room. I'm the whatever, you know, the thing was in my 20s. And it kind of made life miserable, you know? So I hope when people hear this, you can normalize, like, man, when you're trying to always measure up to other people, there's always going to be someone funnier. There's always going to be someone with more money. There's always going to be someone smarter. I mean, there just is, right? And so if that's the goal, then failure is the only avenue, right? That's the only thing that can happen. So begin to ask these questions, like, well, then what does that look like? You know, if that is not true, what is true? And I feel like there's so much grace on that with the Lord, because he made us as women to have all these roles, and he speaks into that. He wants to talk to us about identity. And I feel like, again, I'm not a man, you know, so I don't know what they're thinking, but I don't feel like they sit around and question quite as much, you know, as we do. Like, do I measure up, you know? And so I just began asking him, like, what do you say? Well, what do you say? Well, what's the truth? And I did all those exercises where I went and, like, you know, named I am this and I am that. That didn't always resonate with me. But what did resonate is I would say, okay, I have been believing that I am this. Well, Lord, what do you say?
Yeah.
And man, he would just combat it with a truth. And then I would be like, okay, even if that's hard for me to believe, I'm going to walk in that. And then I would say the more I walked in that, the more I started to go, I actually like me. Like, I like this about myself because he made me this way. Like, this is his intention with it. Now, refined, submitted to the Holy Spirit, like all of those things needed to happen, right? You know, so it's one thing to say, I'm bold and I like this. Well, am I bold or am I hurtful? You see what I'm saying? So you're always kind of trying to like ask the Lord, how did you make me, and so that there would be fruit? Does that make sense? And not an excuse. Y'all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Where you're
yeah.
like, well, I'm just that way, you know? And so I'm careful with that with identity too. Last piece, because I don't want to take up all the oxygen in the room, but I remember when we moved to Memphis when he was in middle school, and we had gone to the same church. We'd lived in the same neighborhood since he like could remember. He had the same group of friends. And then here we move him, and it's like 5th grade, and that's like a Lord of the Flies, y'all. I mean, that is, y'all know, for those of us that have raised kids, like somewhere between 5th grade and 8th grade it's hell, you know, on kids. It's just really difficult. So we walk in, and day one, the pastor's son says, "You're weird." Like, says that to my son. Well, that was it. It sort of became his identity. Like, he started saying, I'm weird, I'm different, I'm this. And I would be like, why, where is that coming from? You know? So I do want to mention, when we're talking about identity, what a big deal it is when we don't know who we are, which what 5th grader knows who they are, but when we don't know who we are and someone speaks false identity over us, man, I would say to him, are you now trying to be the thing? Are you now like, oh, this is who I am, so now I'm trying to live up to that? And so I had to ask myself the same question. You know, do I think I'm a certain way? And so now I'm just trying to live up to that? No, what's the truth about who I actually am? Yeah, it's a wrestle.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think we self-impose identity statements. I remember, well, from the time I was little, I cry. This is what I do. I cry. And I've been called a crybaby from the time I went to kindergarten. You're a crybaby. You know, everybody in my life has always called me a crybaby. And I remember I was like spending some time with the Lord, and my husband came in, and I was explaining something to my husband, and I started to cry. And I said, I'm just a crybaby. So I heard that statement, that identity statement, come out of my mouth. And as soon as I said it, it was like the Lord rebuked me. Like he said, that's not an identity statement that he's given me. And then he started unpacking that with me, of the way he created me, and how when I sense his presence in my life, or when I feel the presence of God in a conversation, crying is like, it's just part of the way he created me. So I think what you were saying with your son, like somebody saying that to him, and it really, it's easy to take that belief inside of you and then start proclaiming it over you as this is the fact.
Yeah.
And I think it does take, something like that to say, are you sure?
Yeah.
Because that really would, I felt disciplined by the Lord when he said, don't, it's like, don't call my child a crybaby. You know what I mean?
So good.
So
Yeah. And
I'm not a crybaby.
He's not intimidated by the questions that we ask him. He wants us to ask him the questions. Is this who I am? Is this how you see me? Do you see me? Because a lot of times, some of that identity is even our own, what we put on our, what am I saying to myself?
Right.
What am I saying, God, about myself?
Where did you get that statement from? Because it wasn't from God.
Or even asking, what's the payoff that I'm receiving for thinking this about myself? Like, I'm less than. Well, now I'm not responsible to do more, or what I actually can do. I can hide behind the I'm less than. And that's it's been fruitful for me to ask that question. What's the payoff for getting into anxiety over this?
Yeah.
And just get into alignment with God's. Just because you don't know how it's going to turn out doesn't mean that it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
So.
Isn't that the truth? Fear of the unknown, all of those things. Well, I feel like we've done a good job of saying, like, these are the things that we did, but I'm usually a practical person too. So I'm not asking anybody for a 3-step process, but I am saying, okay, so these are the things we've done. What would be, like, if someone came to you and said, I'm really struggling to know who I am, how would you tell them to start? What would you say?
Yeah, you have to get some positive identity statements. And, every time I've gone through any ministry sessions, they've always encouraged affirmations, which, on the surface, it feels, oh, they're goofy. I'm not going to stand there and say, I am blah, blah, blah. But I'll tell you, if you do it, it's like you're retraining your brain to think differently. And so even though you might feel goofy standing there saying, I am, and whatever the thing is, that's a positive in your life, I do think it does help, because it's like you have to convince that ugliness inside of you to, and this is what you're going to believe instead.
We know brain science says that that's true.
Yeah.
So this is the thing I love about the way that the word works, is that, it says, as a man thinketh, therefore he is, right? So that's in Proverbs. And then, but we think things like, well, I don't want to stand here and say these positive
feels
affirmations. Like, this feels so weird. But actually, brain science says that from the moment you wake up, the very first thought that you have, the very first thoughts, and there's like millions of them very quickly that you have about yourself, your day will align to prove it. So if you wake up and you think, I'm cranky today, or I'm whatever the thing is, I'm grumpy today, I'm this or that, literally your brain goes, oh, okay, that's the message. Okay, well, I'm going to now go find that to be true, because I need that to be true. And so, that's why they say, like, it's like a magnet. Because it is, because you're seeing it that way, not because you've made it happen. And I think that's what kind of freaks us out about the whole like affirmations and all of that stuff, is that we go, oh, it could get into this. I'm trying to like create my world and all of that. But the reality is that we are telling our brains which message we want to find. So if I'm able to tell my brain today, I'm a person full of joy, then I really am going to see things that remind me of who I actually am. I am a person full of joy. I'm walking through hard circumstances, but I'm a person who carries joy. Well, it just totally changes the way that I respond to the things outside, because we're all going to have that outside stimulus.
And what we focus on grows. But if we're focused on what he says about us, I know for me, a big part of it was receiving God's love, being able to receive it and continually, like, the second verse in Song of Songs says, let him. Do we let him love us? And as we let him love us, then we can see ourselves for who he really created us to be, and keep remind ourselves over and over and over. Because, even like you said about the thoughts in the morning, they say we have over 3,000 negative thoughts a day or more of ourselves, just of ourselves in science. And so we're up against something continually. So having to remind ourselves, he loves me, just as I am, not without performance, without all of the things, even in our shortcomings, right? And so, so for me, it's been that receiving God's love.
That's so good. That's so good. And what would you say to someone who's like, well, I can't receive God's love for whatever reason? Like, I have a hard time with that. I'm not saying I have a hard time with it. It's a work in progress always for all of us.
Right?
But I'm saying, I was just thinking, like, how many times someone young has said, I hear you, but I really struggle with that.
Let him love you through other people. I heard something the other day, a good minister said, he said, we have not been allowed to see, we have been given the opportunity to see a concept of God or a part of God's nature only through relationships.
That's good.
And I was like, wow, that blew me away, because in the people that are close to me or that I've been able to receive love from, unconditional love, that's how I'm seeing an aspect of God.
So good.
So maybe that's what I would say to them.
Yeah, for sure. It's really true.
Yeah, I remember not being able to believe the good things about myself, and but I would have people say, "Well, just borrow my faith until you have yours," because this is what I see. And I was in a group with some women in a kind of a recovery group, and I brought some index cards that day, and I passed them out, and I said, "I need you to write down, because I trusted these women. What do you see in me? And I will believe this. I'm going to take it home, and I'm going to say, this is what I see. This is true about me," because I didn't know how to keep my mental thoughts in check. And, life and power, the death and life are in the power of the tongue, right? So what we say, I remember I had a mentor and I called her up and I said, I was in this, this group where everybody seemed so spiritual and they were hearing from God all the time. And I just said, I don't hear. And she stopped me right there. And she said, Kathy, she had a real Southern accent. She goes, I want you to go around your house and I just want you to say, I love hearing from the Lord. I hear from the Lord all the time. I hear God all the time. And I'm like, okay. And I hang up the phone and I'm telling you, within 15 minutes, I was out of that place.
Yeah.
And so it's not an instant fix, but just these are very practical ways that we have to engage.
Yeah. I think that exactly what you both said that I just picked up on, you said decide. I think it was something in what you said was decide, and you said decide and engage, Would you say that's been true too?
Yes. And I would also say identify where you're getting the negative. Because there's so much negative out there feeding that unstable identity that we have. I mean, it's all over the place. And like fake book. Do you know what I'm saying? Like everybody, I always say that's a plastic world. Like the internet, social media, it's a plastic world.
Yeah.
I'm not putting my worst moments of my life on the internet. I'm putting the best. So there have actually been seasons where I would just have to let go of social media and come off of it because I knew it was feeding the insecurity that I had in me, even though I knew my brain, your brain knows that's fake, but it's still hitting you in such a way that if you're in a place where you're feeling defeated in a particular area, and then you're going to constantly see everybody winning in that area, how is that going to help my identity? How is that going to help my day? So I've actually had to come off of the different social media platforms for seasons, for time, just to kind of re-engage in my own world instead of wondering why I don't have XYZ or why they're doing so great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just have to guard yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
It's
I
really
agree.
good in identifying and then making a decision
Yeah.
because God's voice is not going to blast us down and you're not going to be like, da, 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 don't do that. It's going to be very small and quiet. And if you're like, I'm identifying that I'm not feeling great looking at this.
Yeah, how's that
I'm
making
feeling
me feel?
pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I'm going to make a decision.
Right.
A healthy, what's best for me?
Right.
Like she was like, had the cards, like this is what you say, God. Okay, I'm going to put that down. And it's hard. It's hard because our flesh wants to do what it wants to do. I love that you brought up the point about beauty and all that. Women love beauty and we want to look beautiful and it's okay to look beautiful, but what does he say about it? So,
Well, and he created you. And so beauty is arbitrary then because are you not beautiful if he created you, regardless of if you fit some mold that the world said is beautiful? And I think that that's what was so convicting for me was, and we have so many things that I want to talk about because I want to talk about taking care of yourself and what that looks like and honoring who God made you and all of that. But to your point, I think to the point we've all been trying to make, it's comparison. When we're comparing, it leads to destruction. And, one thing that I did for my boys, I have always been such an identity person, I think, because I struggled so much early on and did a lot of things that were really negative and harsh, trying to beat myself up or talk myself into something better, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The crybaby thing, we don't cry, we're tough, that kind of stuff that didn't work. That was just such a more condemning and shaming. So early on, here I'm having boys and I'm like, man, how you talk to your kids is a really big deal, like the things that you say. So I found, this is going to age me for sure. I'm sure you can find it now in different ways. I do like voice memos for myself. So maybe people could do that for their kids. But I found these CDs from a brain doctor who was a believer. And so these identity statements were both brain identity statements, but then also like based in scripture. And I would play them at night or I would play them around the house during the day and it would just play over and over again.
Wow.
Don't ask me if I think that really, made some huge impact. I don't know, but I just felt like I was pouring in. I felt like they were combating so much.
Yes.
To your point,
Yeah.
these 3,000 negative thoughts. And I would say that's probably a conservative estimate, but all these negative thoughts that they're combating. And I was just like, I just want them to hear how amazing they are, and maybe at some point this will resonate. Well, now I have grandbabies, you know, and you just see it playing all over again,
Yeah.
even in how you speak to them about, you know, he throws something on the floor. I don't know. I'm just not going to say anymore. Like, oh, that you're so naughty. No, you're not. You're two. You know, like you don't have a little brain in there yet that really understands all this stuff, you know? So,
And we have to forgive ourselves for raising kids in a different mindset than we are today.
Yeah.
Like I constantly have to say, okay, well, yeah, maybe I should have done that better.
Sure.
Maybe I should have, you know, played affirmation statements over my kid, but it's going to be okay because God's got them and it's going to be okay.
Yes.
You know, and you're going to be such a, you know, you're an amazing mom, but you're going to be such a more of amazing grandma because of the stage you are in life and lessons learned. I mean,
I agree.
we don't come into this earth knowing everything. We learn as we go. And so, you know, I think we're wiser now than we were when we were having kids in our young 20s.
Well,
One
in
would hope.
Jesus' name.
You would hope. I also think that we need to, one other tangible thing is, you know, all this with identity is very self, right? But the same way that we can have affirmation statements over ourselves, I find it helps me to have affirmation statements towards the Lord, like, God, you are. God, you are. Scripture says you are. You said this to me. You said this to me. And you are trustworthy because I think if I can focus and get my eyes off of me some, because we are in general a people group that are very self-absorbed, you know, just in general. If I can get my mind shifting away from me all the time and onto the Lord, well, he's the one that created me anyway. So like you were saying, he created me like this. He put, you know, this hair on my head, these hips on my, you know what I mean? Like the things that maybe I don't prefer, and he made me this way. So if I can focus my attention on the Lord and who he is, then he will rightly help me to see myself. Right. You know, he will help me see myself rightly because he created us.
Yeah. So good. So good. Thank you, ladies. That was awesome.
It's good.